Hello everyone, my name is Ritesh Gupta. I'm from AI Event Sale and Information. Welcome to AI's new video. Our topic for today is leveraging pay over time option as a tool for loyalty. To discuss the same, I have with me Jason Reski. Hello Jason, how are you doing?
Hi, Ritesh. It's great to speak with you again.
Same here. Jason, the reason we have chosen this topic is for several reasons. One, travel merchants are increasingly looking at this option now, even though flexible payments is not new. We heard about JetBlue's decision to go ahead yesterday with Marcus Pay. Secondly, consumers are already looking at financial wellness. They are looking at things like savings, investments, spending in a new way. Um, in fact, it is being said that flexible payments is not seen as a debt. So, um, considering what's happening on the merchant side and also from the consumer's perspective, what do you make of inroads being made by consumer brands focused on personal finance and flexible payment in our lives today?
Yeah, look, I'm a huge fan of the category. I really been enjoying following the evolution of fintech over the past few years. I think some of the innovation that they've pulled out over the past little while has been really tremendous. And ultimately, if they're able to drive better behaviors as a result of better user experiences, more attractive pricing, and frankly more innovative products and services, I think that's great. I mean, if you get, I mean, buy now, pay later is the latest and greatest, which is fabulous. But if you look back to what WeChat have done, or Alipay, or Grab, or some of the others, then they're really impressive businesses that are really expanding quite successfully into other categories, and of course are getting their own banking licenses themselves to expand even further. So as these organizations sort of expand out into other categories, they become the one-stop shop for everything lifestyle related, and including travel, of course. If you're on the other side of the equation, if you're in a travel brand, clearly you need to be very mindful of how you want to work with these organizations, because you can't hope they're going to go away. You want to figure out how you can develop a sustainable and attractive partnership strategy with them. But that said, of course, you need to be mindful of each other's strategies, right? Is working with one of these organizations purely a customer acquisition play for them? Is it in crude terms, is it a database raid, or is there a long-term alignment in terms of what their mutual objectives can be? What do the economics look like? They've obviously raised a ton of capital that they're spending very effectively to acquire customers, but how does that all work out in the medium term? So if you think of what the OTAs were like 10, 15, 20 years ago with respect to their relationships with travel brands, think about what that means from an Alipay or a GrabPay or any other buy now pay later, or any other successful fintech, and think through how that relationship is going to evolve over time.
Jason, you refer to behavior and you have referred to certain apps where consumers are spending a lot of time. Um, if we just talk about these BNPL or buy now pay later brands from a mobile app perspective, where how much time I'm spending today on these apps, do you see them as entry point for travel? The reason being, the consumer is looking at these apps or spending more time, because fintech is not just about one aspect of your finance management today. They are managing your spending, giving you recommendations on how to go about investments, how to manage your bill payments. So looking at all these financial management perspective and how fintech players are coming up with certain propositions, do you see these apps as entry point for travel and then going on and building a loyalty aspect as well?
Look, I think they've done a great job of expanding their footprint beyond just the immediate lending. Obviously they went after various aspects of prepaid cards or debit cards. They moved into FX. They've done a whole bunch of different things, payments related, lending related, and so on and so forth. And that's fantastic. I think they're rightly building out their ecosystem strategy. But if you look at buy now, pay later in particular, they seem to be largely attracting younger demographics. And so you need to really think through the varying loyalty strategies that are part and parcel of how those demographics engage with your brand. So is there a real opportunity for a buy now, for an Afterpay or a Klarna or somebody like that to work with a travel brand? 100%, absolutely. But you need to think about it in the context of what a win-win relationship could look like. So, for example, Qantas did a deal with Afterpay a little while ago, which made a lot of headlines and sounds really attractive. But if you actually pull back the hood of what that deal looks like, it's fairly limited and in scope and scale, and for good reason, because the travel providers or the loyalty programs themselves have very long established and very profitable relationships with, frankly, their competitors in the form of banks and credit card companies. And so you need to be very careful about how you structure those relationships to make sure that you can get the best of both worlds from a travel provider's perspective. Now, does it provide an entry point, coming back to your question, into travel? Sure, absolutely. It attracts a different type of demographic into the travel ecosystem. Does it really drive long-term loyalty to those travel providers? I think it's a little bit early to make that call just yet. But I think they're doing exactly the right thing to test it and learn from the experience, whether it's Qantas or JetBlue most recently, of course. I think it's great to be innovating and testing things out, but just need to be very, very careful not to jeopardize their credit card relationships, because right now, from a travel provider's perspective, they seem to be the only thing that's making money for these groups.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned that the travel merchants have to look at both sides of the options available, whether it's consumer spending, which is driven by credit cards, and on the other hand, there are new apps or new fintech players which are driving audience away from credit cards. But from a travel merchant perspective, rather than just looking at the shop or earn and burn cycle, how do you think travel merchants can creatively associate themselves with these new fintech players? I'll give you an example. A firm which is on the basis of its study in the US, which featured Gen Z and millennials. They surveyed 1,500 consumers, and it came out that 50% still have the desire to travel. I'm talking about a couple of months ago. Their focus is on savings. So how creatively travel merchants can touch upon the psyche of these consumers who are looking at strong options like saving money or their financial wellness, and creatively associate themselves in the early booking phases, in the inspiration phase or the dreaming phase. Do you see these kind of creative things coming out from travel merchant side so that they can target the audience better?
Absolutely. I think there's a whole bunch of opportunities and creativity that can be created by getting the travel providers and the buy now pay later providers working together. To your point, they are attracting largely younger demographics, and so you need to be mindful of how you structure those how you structure those offers, how you structure those relationships. But if you can get people who otherwise were thinking that they didn't have the means or the ability or the wherewithal to be able to consider travel for the first time, or restart travel in the more recent situation, of course, then I think it's a brilliant opportunity. And I think we just need to, and particularly those younger demographics who aren't really focusing on credit card right now, they seem to be migrating more towards these other payment options and lending options. Then I think it's a brilliant opportunity to attract a new type of customer to the airline, the hotel, to whomever. You just need to be very careful on not to not to compromise some of the existing well-established behaviors and creativity and processes that may already exist with some of the more entrenched partners. But I think there's absolutely opportunities to use those providers as an entry point into the travel ecosystem, and develop much more interesting relationships for an entirely different demographic that otherwise probably wouldn't consider more extravagant travel.
Um, do you think the way consumers, especially the younger generation, is now looking at managing their money, uh, it can psychologically trigger spend on travel?
Yeah, look, I think like anything else, if you can get somebody to start considering travel when they otherwise thought that they couldn't, then that's a great thing. Then absolutely, that's what Buy Now Pay Later does exceedingly well, right? Whether it's on travel or on big purchase retail or any other products, they've figured out a way to package products that frankly that are probably a little bit beyond their people's means, at least initially, and make it attractive over the medium term. So I think it's absolutely workable. In terms of getting them into the ecosystem, and coming back to the loyalty earn and burn cycle, it's just another partner. It's just another way of getting people hooked into that ecosystem. So whether you're paying with an Afterpay, an Amex, or going to a supermarket, or going to a petrol station, or staying in a hotel, if you're creating that ecosystem where they're creating an attraction for attractive incentive structure, so that people are seeking out those miles or points or whatever the case may be, because they're transacting through Afterpay or Klarna or whomever, then that just reinforces that ecosystem and that existing behavior, which is obviously helpful over the medium to longer term.
How are fintech players redefining loyalty? If we look at the way they see loyalty currency or earning points, they suggest that instead of paying in advance through credit cards, they only allot a certain currency when the payment is complete. So they're assuring customers that loyalty is the earning part is just not coming by way of using a credit card. It is coming along when your spending is done. That's number one. So they are saying they are rewarding consumers for a planned spending.
Sure.
How fintech players with this kind of mindset are redefining loyalty? Does a consumer who's on a typical or a traditional loyalty program views these new loyalty programs which are being run by BNPL players? Do they view them differently? Is fintech redefining loyalty?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think ultimately, if you look back to the business models of what these fintechs are doing, right? They've come up with a fantastic user experience. They've come up with some attractive pricing, and they're taking the fight to the big players, the established players, which is exactly the right thing to be doing. And they're doing it off the back of enormous amounts of money that they're raising in the capital markets or otherwise. So they're raising a lot of money to basically buy customers and buy customer experience, which is fantastic. And now they're starting to realize, or come to not realize, pivoting to focusing on how can I retain these customers? How can I grow those relationships more in a more sustainable and a long-term fashion? That's of course where loyalty programs come in, and that's where CRM comes in into its own, of course. I think whether they're redefining loyalty in and of itself, no, I don't think they're redefining loyalty. I think what they are going to be doing is they're going to be bringing some of the learnings and some of the experience of delivering great customer experiences into loyalty programs, which is fantastic. So they're going to be driving and innovating and taking the fight, much like they've taken the fight to the big banks and others and credit card providers. They're going to be taking the fight to the loyalty providers themselves as well. And so as now when travel in particular is quite limited as an incentive to drive behavior, they're establishing behavior and continuing behavior, which of course will be difficult to pull back from. So if you're an existing travel program, for example, you don't really have a redemption hook to keep people engaged. Whereas buy now, pay later, that's what they do, and that's what they do really, really well. And then extend that thinking out into the WeChats, the Alipays, and the Grabs, and so on. Then it becomes even more complex because you're really locking people into these ecosystems already. And they're really taking the fight to loyalty providers who are going to have their hands full innovating and delivering much better user experiences when historically all they've really had to rely on is offering a free hotel room or a free upgrade or whatever the case may be, which is fairly straightforward to do. So I think the technology, I think the user experience, and I think the accessibility that these fintech players and buy now pay later providers are offering are going to be really, really interesting and really developing a compelling, challenging opportunity for the loyalty space going forward. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Lastly, Jason, what's your recommendation to fintech players as they look to work with airlines? And again, flipping the side, what's your recommendation to airlines as they try to work, they build on their association with BNPL or even personal finance players?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, much like any sustainable relationship, you need to be honest and clear in terms of what your objectives are as the two parties come together, figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So as you think through your relationship, is it a customer acquisition strategy? Is it a retention strategy? Is it an upsell? Is it payment on time, or whatever the case may be? Let's just be cognizant of what the other player's key objective may be. And work through the economics of what that relationship could look like. I think there's an enormous opportunity to do very interesting, innovative, and creative things. But I think there's also a realization that needs to take place on both sides that whilst fintech is really interesting and really compelling model to be exploring right now, we need to be quite careful so as not to jeopardize some of the other established relationships that may exist, particularly in the form of banks and credit cards that, as I said before, are really funding the travel providers right now. So I think there's a real interesting path forward as these players come together, and they inevitably will come together more and more regularly. But just need to do so with open eyes and be upfront in terms of the relationships and structuring of those deals.
Thanks, Jason, for your time.
Thank you very much, Ritesh. It's great to speak with you.